Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last segment on Chapter 8, Segment 8G. So far, we've been looking at the individual firm and assuming they're price takers and then figuring out what's their profit maximizing output and are they making profit or losses and that sort of thing. But of course, even though they're price takers, the industry demand and the industry supply curve is huge, and those can shift over time and change the price that the individual firm faces. So in this particular section, we're going to focus on increasing or decreasing industry demand and supply, and then look at what effect that has on something called the long run supply curve, and therefore prices that result in the industry. And note, this is not about the long run average cost curve. That was in previous chapters where we actually talked about the costs. This is about the long run supply curve, which is a different thing. So in the short run, the firm and the industry are fixed in size. So if you look on the left-hand side of this figure we've got here, the short run, we're saying that the firm, the size is fixed. We've picked the size of our firm. We've limited our capital. So therefore, the number of firms is also fixed in the industry, and the capacity of the industry is also fixed. So the amount of output that can be produced. But in the long run, the size of an individual firm can vary. They can expand or contract, and the number of firms in the industry can vary. So if there's lots of economic profits in the industry, we get more and more firms in the industry. And that's what we're going to look at now. And in that case, in the long run, the capacity or the production ability of the industry can vary as well. And it all focuses on thinking of the difference between the short run and the long run. And in the short run, we've got fixed capacity because we've limited some factor of production. And in the long run, we can vary that and expand the company sizes, and companies can enter or leave, all due to whether or not there's being economic profits made in that industry or not. Okay, so let's take a look at the effects of an increase in demand on a particular industry and on the particular firm in that industry. So here's our demand curve initially, and here's our supply curve initially. So I can trace those. There's my demand. There's my supply. And of course, we intersect at a particular price equilibrium. So if this were a situation where all the firms in the industry happen to be breaking even, we can start our analysis there. So let's take a look at what happens when there's a big increase in demand. So initially, here's my big jump in demand up to D2. And at that particular point in time, we see that we've got a higher equilibrium price. Notice supply hasn't increased yet. I've just increased demand. So we go up to a higher price level, up to P2, for example. In that particular case now, all the old firms in the industry will be making economic profits. So let's look down below at the diagram here. At the original price 1, we can say that all the representative firms were just at their break-even point. No economic profits to be had. But with that shift in demand, the price level went up to P2. So this particular price is transferred up to P2. And we notice then the profit maximizing position where price equals marginal cost, they'd have a different quantity. But the main point is that price is now above their average cost. So they're all making economic profits. So in the long run, those firms were making economic profits due to that increase in demand and the increase in price. And those economic profits attract new firms to enter. So that means our supply curve now increases. So I'm just going to show it here. Here's our supply curve increasing in the industry. And we just drew it so it magically comes back to a new equilibrium point here. And we're back down to our original P1. Now, new firms have entered the industry, and that's what's caused supply to increase because they were chasing profit. And in the end, what they did was they pushed the price back down to P1. So everyone including the new people or the new companies in the industry, are back to just making a normal profit. They're back to just breaking even, priced at the lowest part of their average cost curve. So overall, the industry now has higher output at output level C, which is way up here. They started at output level A way back here. So obviously the industry has expanded, and the way that expansion has happened is more firms have entered it. But now the average firm is back to producing just its normal return or normal amount and earning just a normal return. Okay, so a quick summary of that is an increase in demand causes higher prices. Those higher prices are given to producers, right? They're price takers, and it shows that they're making economic profits now. So other firms, because there's freedom of entry into this industry, it's perfect competition after all, other firms are attracted to that profit, and so they enter the industry in large numbers. So as those large numbers of firms enter the industry supply curve shifts to the right, like we've shown, and prices tend to trickle back down so that the new firms and the old firms in this larger industry are back to earning just normal profits again. They're back to breaking even. Now, the same thing or a similar thing can happen if it starts off with a decrease in demand. So if for some reason there's declining demand. But let's start here where we've got our demand curve in the industry, D1, and we've got a supply curve in this perfectly competitive industry, S1, and they happen to yield to us an equilibrium price of P1. Okay, so all the firms existing in the industry, we can assume, are just breaking even. So they're earning this P1 determined from this above diagram. But then if there's a sudden drop in demand for whatever, a change in tastes, for example, and demand drops to D2, we see that initially, we've got the same supply curve. Initially, prices have fallen to P2. They've decreased. So we come down and transfer that price to the individual representative firms at P2, and we notice that that price is below their average cost. So they're not earning economic profits anymore. In fact, they're making some losses. So in the long run, those firms that are making losses will slowly exit the industry. As they exit the industry en masse, the supply curve shifts to the left. So we're at S2. And in that case, supply keeps reducing. That means prices keep getting pushed back up as supply is reduced. And we finally get back to our original price, P1. And I can transfer that down here and show that at that price, firms are breaking even again. But the industry is a lot smaller because there's less firms. So summarizing, initially the equilibrium's at price P1, the red demand and supply curve. So if there's a decrease in demand initially, then price falls. So in the long run, those firms that are making economic losses, some of them will exit. And if enough of them exit, that causes a decrease in supply. And that decrease in supply pushes prices back up to P1. And now we've got fewer firms in the industry, a lower output in the industry, but the firms that stayed in the industry are back to breaking even. So here's the initial output A in the industry, and in the end, it's come down to output C in the industry. So the overall industry has shrank due to that initial decrease in demand, causing lower economic profits or negative profits. Firms leave the industry, supply shifts to the left because firms are leaving, prices come back up, and then the industry balances out at a smaller size, but the existing firms are just breaking even again. So let's go back to the point where we've got increasing demand and increasing supply in the industry. And we're going to end up plotting the long run supply. And note, this is not long run average costs, it's long run supply. And if we've got increasing demand and increasing supply in the industry, And we've been able to see that the prices of resources, so the cost of the resources and the products that we're selling, both rise as the industry expands. Then we just call that an increasing cost industry, right? Pretty straightforward. And if we find with increasing demand in the industry and increasing supply in the industry, that the prices of the resources or the cost of the resources and the prices of the products are both falling, we just call that a decreasing cost industry. And we're going to graph these. And then, of course, a constant cost industry, in the long run, we find out that the prices of the resources or the costs of resources and the prices of the products we're selling, they kind of remain unchanged as the industry expands due to the increasing demand and supply. We call that a constant cost industry. So now let's take a look at the pictures of these three scenarios to see if we can understand that a little bit better. So here we are. First note that, of course, in the long run, increases in demand can cause increases in supply because that increase in demand raises profits and new firms come into the industry. So the conclusion we want to draw is if costs also increase, the long run supply curve slopes up. And that's this one that I'm circling here. That's the long run supply curve. So you can see here we've got an increase in demand, which resulted also in an increase in supply because new firms entered, and another increase in demand resulting in another increase in supply because new firms entered, chasing those economic profits. But we're seeing that here, average price of the product is going up. So we've got this one intersection with the price here, and we end up here at an equilibrium with the price of the product higher. And that's because there's been increasing costs in that industry. So we show that rising long run supply curve. And it's hard to find examples. I like the one they use in the text, the NHL hockey expansion that happened many, many years ago. There was a big increase in demand for really good players. But at the same time, there was an increase in supply of really good players, but the costs and salaries of those players dramatically increased. So overall, the price of the product also increased. And so we see this rising long run supply curve. Okay, let's look at the second scenario where here, scenario B is with that increasing demand and increasing supply, if the long run supply curve ends up sloping downward, that's because there's been decreasing costs. So we see an increase in demand from D1 to D2. There was economic profits and consequently an increase in supply, but there was lower costs of production. So when we go one more time, a big increase in demand to D3 and a consequent increase in supply because they're chasing the economic profits, the costs of the resources were declining. So we can see overall, we started out at a higher price of the product. And here with D3 and S3, we end up with a lower price of the product. That's because this is a decreasing cost industry. And when we connect the dots, we have a downward sloping long run supply curve. These were short run supply curves here, but a downward sloping long run supply curve. And the example they use in the text is very appropriate. Think of computers. Over the years, since I was in university, the demand for computers has skyrocketed. Huge increases in demand overall. But of course, the supply of computers has increased lockstep along with that. There has been a huge increase in production and supply of computers. However, because of the decreasing costs of the components of the computers, the actual price of the computers themselves has fallen off dramatically. So we have this decreasing cost industry resulting in a declining long run supply curve, just to show that the price of the output is going down because the costs of the components has gone down in the long run as well. So now let's look at the final scenario, the constant costs. So if we've determined that if costs remain unchanged in an industry, the long run supply curve is flat. So we're looking at point C here where demand has increased D1 to D2. We can presume there was some economic profit to be made. So new firms entered, so supply increased S1 to S2, and then demand increased again in our scenario and consequent supply increased because they were chasing the economic profits. Here, when we show the output price P and the output price here, with our higher demand and supply being the same, we say that's a constant cost industry. What has happened is the component costs or the input costs haven't changed much over time. So the increasing demand and increasing supply has resulted in a very similar long run price. So we have this flat long run supply curve in this case because it is a constant cost industry. The examples they use in the text are content type industries like books or music or information. Like I worked for a company called Reuters, there's Bloomberg information. These are all constant costs over time, more or less. And this example is what we've been using so far in all of our examples. We've been assuming a constant cost industry just because it's easier to explain shifts in demand and shifts in supply and stuff like that. So there's the three scenarios. Increasing, decreasing, and constant cost industries result in rising, falling, or flat long-run supply curves. So there is an example that I won't go through in this particular segment that we're doing, but I'll click to it. It asks you to increase demand and increase supply and to show in the end whether you have a increasing, decreasing, or constant cost industry. That's the end of the segments for this particular chapter. After this, we're going to go on to monopolistic, and we'll see you when we get there.